After the last battle of the Great Galactic War, the stars finally fell silent. The alliance of human worlds had won, but at a terrible cost. Entire colonies were gone, fleets reduced to drifting metal bones, and billions of lives lost in the fire of plasma and antimatter. The war had lasted 12 long years, and now peace hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Thin, uncertain, and fragile, on the edge of Sector 9, orbiting a dying red dwarf star, sat Outpost Echo. A lonely human listening post once used to track enemy movements. Now it served as a temporary holding station for prisoners of war. Most had been shipped off to rehabilitation camps or repatriated to their shattered homeworlds. But one remained. Lieutenant Daniel Brooks sat alone in the mess hall of Outpost Echo, staring into a cup of cold coffee. He was 32 years old, with tired eyes and a scar that ran from his left temple down to his jaw. A souvenir from the siege of Helios Prime. He had expected to go home after the war, maybe open a small repair shop back on Mars, maybe even find someone to share quiet evenings with. Instead, he had been handed a new assignment, babysitting the last known member of the Zenthari species. Her name was Lyra. She was not what Daniel expected when he imagined an alien warlord. The Zenthari had been the fiercest enemies of humanity, their warships carved from living crystal, their warriors trained from birth to conquer and destroy. But Lyra looked nothing like the monsters in the propaganda reels. She stood just under 6 feet tall, her skin a soft violet hue that shimmered faintly under the station lights. Her eyes were large and silver with no visible pupils, and her hair flowed like strands of liquid obsidian down to her waist. She wore a simple gray jumpsuit provided by the Alliance and moved with a grace that made even the sterile corridors of the outpost seem elegant. Daniel had been told she was dangerous, that she had commanded a Zenthari dreadnought that destroyed 3 human colonies, that she had personally ordered the glassing of New Atlantis. But when he looked at her, all he saw was exhaustion. She sat across from him now in the mess hall, her hands folded neatly on the table. She had not spoken a word since her arrival 3 days ago, not even when the guards brought her meals. "You don't have to sit with me," Daniel said. Breaking the silence, his voice rough from disuse. Lyra tilted her head slightly as if considering his words, then she spoke. Her voice was low, melodic, and carried a strange echo, as though 2 people were speaking at once. "I am not your prisoner," she said. "Technically, you are," Daniel replied. "You're the last Zenthari alive as far as we know, and the Alliance wants you studied, observed, kept safe." She repeated the word like it was foreign to her tongue. "Safe from what? From your people or from mine?" Daniel didn't answer. He knew the truth. The Zenthari had turned on each other in the final days of the war. Their own civil war had torn their empire apart long before humanity delivered the final blow. Lyra had been on the losing side, the side that wanted peace. "Why did you surrender?" he asked. "Because I was tired," she said simply. "Tired of watching my people burn themselves alive in the name of glory. Tired of choosing between honor and survival." Daniel leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You could have run hidden in the void. Somewhere no one would have found you, and done what she asked her." Silver eyes locking onto his, "Become a ghost, haunting the ruins of a dead civilization. No, I chose to face what remains." Over the next few days, Daniel found himself drawn to her. Not in the way he had been drawn to women before. This was different. It was curiosity, respect, maybe even pity, but something deeper too. She spoke little, but when she did, her words carried weight. She asked about Earth, about oceans and trees and music. Things the Zenthari had never known. Their world had been a desert, planet orbiting a binary star. Life there was harsh and short, and beauty was seen as weakness. One evening, as Daniel walked the observation deck, he found Lyra standing by the viewport, her reflection ghostly against the blackness of space. "Do you miss it?" he asked, joining Hermie World. She said, "It was never beautiful, but it was mine." He nodded, understanding more than he let on. They began to talk more after that, sharing stories of loss and hope. She told him of her brother who had died defending their home city. He told her of his younger sister who had vanished during the evacuation of Ceres Station. They spoke of small things too, the taste of real fruit, the sound of rain, the feeling of wind on bare skin. Then the alert came, a distress signal. From the outer rim, a human freighter had been attacked, not by pirates but by something else. The transmission was garbled, but one word came through clearly. Zenthara. Daniel felt his blood run cold. He turned to Lyra, who stood frozen in the hallway. "Outside the comms room, that can't be." "He said the Xanthari are gone." "Are they?" she whispered. The freighter was adrift near the Kessel Drift, its hull torn open. Its crew missing only one survivor. A young woman named Claire who babbled about glowing eyes and voices that spoke inside her head. Daniel and Lyra were sent to investigate aboard a small scout ship, the only vessel outpost Echo could spare. As they approached the derelict freighter, Lyra grew quiet, her hands trembling slightly. "You know something?" Daniel said. "I hoped it was gone." She replied, the voice in the transmission. "It was not Xanthari, not truly. It was something older, something we tried to control." "What are you talking about before the war? Before the rise of our empire?" "My people discovered a signal buried deep in the crust of our world. It was ancient, older than stars. It promised power knowledge, but it demanded obedience. We called it the Whisperer. At first, it helped us build our cities, gave us technology beyond imagining. But then, it began to change us. It made us cruel, made us see other life as less than nothing. We thought we were using it. But it was using us." Daniel stared at her. "So the war, the Xanthari aggression, it was all because of this thing," as she said. "And now it has found a new host." They boarded the freighter, weapons drawn. The corridors were dark and cold, signs of struggle everywhere, but no bodies. Then they found Claire huddled in the engine room, her eyes wide, unblinking. She turned to them and smiled, a smile that did not belong to her. "Welcome," she said in a voice layered with whispers. "You are too late." Lyra stepped forward, her voice firm. "The Whisperer, you have no power here." "Oh, but I do." The thing inside, Claire said. "It has already begun. The humans will be easier to break than your kind. They crave order. They fear chaos. They will welcome." Daniel raised his sidearm, but Lyra stopped him. "No bullets will not stop this," she said. "Only truth can silence the Whisperers." He walked toward Claire slowly, her hands open and empty. She began to sing. It was not a song Daniel recognized. It had no words, only tones that rose and fell like waves in an unseen ocean. The air around them shimmered, and for a moment the lights flickered. Claire screamed, clutching, her head as if something inside her was tearing free. The Whisperer fought back. Images flooded Daniel's mind, visions of fire and conquest, promises of power and peace. But he held on to Lyra's voice, to the memory of her telling him about the first time she saw an earth flower in the outpost greenhouse, small, fragile, but alive. With a final cry, Claire collapsed, the Whisperer gone, expelled from her mind. In the silence that followed, Daniel helped Lyra to her feet. She was pale, her breathing shallow. "You saved her," he said. "We saved each other." She replied. Back at Outpost Echo, the Alliance Command sent new orders. Lyra was no longer a prisoner. She was to be given full diplomatic status, a voice for her people, even if there were none left to speak. For Daniel stood with her on the observation deck once more, the stars stretched endlessly before them. "What will you do now?" he asked. "Live," she said simply, "and help others do the same." He smiled for the first time in years. Maybe this was the beginning. Not the end. And as the red dwarf star cast its dim light over the station, two beings from different worlds stood together, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as something new, something hopeful, in the quiet aftermath of war. The journey to the outer rim took 6 days, and in that time Daniel learned to listen, not just with his ears but with his whole self. Lyra taught him how to hear the silence between stars, how to feel the tremor in a voice that meant fear, not fatigue, how to tell when a story was being told to hide something rather than share it. It was not training, it was trust, and it grew between them like roots in dry soil, slow but strong. Their destination was Kestros, a mining moon long abandoned after the war, its surface scarred by old battles and deeper still by something older. The Council had received a signal from there, not a distress call but a song, one that matched no known language, yet carried the same echo as the Whisperer, only different. Softer, like a question instead of a command. When they landed, the air was thin and cold. The sky a bruised purple from dust storms that never quite settled. The ruins of the old mining outpost stood like broken teeth against the horizon, and in the center of it all a structure pulsed with faint blue light. Not the angry red of the Whisperer, but something calmer. Something watching Lyra stepped out first, her boots crunching on the frozen ground. She did not speak, but Daniel saw the way her shoulders tensed, the way her fingers curled slightly as if bracing for impact. "This is not the Whisperer," she said after a long moment. "This is its twin." Daniel frowned. "You mean there are two?" "No," she replied. "There were many once fragments of a single mind scattered across the galaxy. When the first civilizations rose, they found these fragments and called them gods or demons or machines depending on their fear. But they were never meant to be used. They were meant to be heard. So what is this one doing?" "Here, asking," she said. They moved toward the structure slowly. The ground beneath them humming with energy. As they neared, the blue light brightened, and from within it a figure emerged. Not human, not Zenthari, but something shaped by both their thoughts. A being, of light and shadow, with eyes that held galaxies. "Welcome, travelers," it said, its voice like wind through ancient trees. "You carry the song of resistance." "We do," Daniel said, stepping forward. "What do you want, not want?" The being replied, "Only witness you have broken the chains of the Whisperer. But chains can be reforged unless the truth is remembered, not as a weapon, but as a seed." Lyra tilted her head. "What truth?" "That no mind should be alone." The being said, "The Whisperer sought unity through silence. But true unity comes through difference, through voices that clash and learn and grow. The fragments were never meant to control, only to connect." Daniel thought of Lily, of the children on Ceres, of all the people who had lost themselves to the promise of peace without pain. "How do we stop it from happening again?" he asked. "You do not stop it," the being said. "You outgrow it. You build worlds where pain is not hidden, but held, where fear is not erased, but faced togetherly." Lyra stepped closer, her silver eyes reflecting the blue light. "You are not like the Whisperer and what it could have been," the being said, "if it had been raised with kindness instead of conquest." Before they left, the being gave them a gift, not a device, not a weapon, but a memory, a vision of the first time two minds had touched across the void, not to conquer, but to say, "I am here, and so are you." Back on the ship, Daniel sat in silence for a long time, the vision still echoing in his chest. "Do you think we can really build that kind of world?" Lyra asked, joining him. "I don't know," he said, "but I think we have to try." Their next stop was Viridia, a lush green world that had refused to join the Alliance during the war. Its people lived in harmony with their environment and had developed a form of communication based on scent and sound rather than words. They welcomed Daniel and Lyra, not as heroes but as guests. There they met Nora, a young botanist who had been studying the effects of the Whisperer's signal on plant life. She showed them fields where crops had stopped growing, not from disease but from a kind of despair, as if the plants themselves had given up. "The Whisperer does not just affect minds," she explained. "It seeps into everything living or not. It makes the world forget how to hope." Lyra knelt in the soil, her fingers brushing the wilted leaves, and began to hum the same lullaby she had sung on Ceres. Slowly the leaves trembled, then lifted toward the sun. Nora gasped, "It worked, not me." Lyra said the world was always ready. To heal it just needed to be reminded. They stayed on Viridia for a week, teaching the people how to listen to their land, how to sing back when the silence grew too heavy. Nora joined them when they left, saying she wanted to help other worlds remember how to breathe. Their small crew grew in the icy plains of Frosthold. They met Jules, a former engineer who had lost her entire family to a Whisperer-influenced evacuation order. She had spent years building signal jammers, not to block the Whisperer, but to create space for real voices to be heard. She climbed aboard their ship with a pack full of tools and a heart full of quiet rage. On the floating cities of Aqualis, they found Mara, a teacher who had hidden her students in underwater caves. When the Whisperer came, she taught them stories of rebellion, of courage, of love that defied control. She came with songs written on shells and a voice that could calm storms one by one. They gathered not an army but a chorus, and the Whisperer noticed it, began to fight back. Not with force but with lies. It sent false signals pretending to be colonies in need. It whispered doubts into their dreams, telling Daniel he was failing his sister, telling Lyra she was still a monster, no matter how many lives she saved. But they had learned to recognize its voice. When a signal came from Mars claiming the Whisperer had taken root in the capital city, they almost believed it. until Nora pointed out the plants described in the message did not grow on Mars, and Jules found a timing glitch in the transmission. It was a trap. They went anyway, but not to fight to show the galaxy that fear could be faced without violence. They arrived to find the city quiet but not empty. People stood in the streets, not silver-eyed but watchful, holding hands, singing softly to each other. The whisperer had tried to take hold, but the people had been ready. They had built listening circles. They had taught their children the old songs. They had remembered how to be human. Whisperer retreated, not with a scream but with a sigh, like a tide pulling back from shore. In the aftermath, Daniel stood on a rooftop watching the sunset paint the sky in gold and red. Lyra joined him, her hair catching the light like starlight. "We did it?" he said. "Not yet," she replied, "but we are doing it." Their ship now called the Echo after the outpost that had started. It all carried more than just people. It carried seeds, songs, stories, tools for building, not destroying. And most of all, it carried the belief that peace was not the absence of conflict but the presence of connection. They received a message from Elena then. Brief and coded, she had found the original source of the fragments. A dead world at the center of the galaxy, where the first minds had touched and broken apart. She was going there to see if the last piece could be healed. Daniel looked at his crew, at Lyra, at the faces that had become his family. "We go with her," he said, and so they turned the ship toward the core. Not as soldiers, not as saviors, but as witnesses to what could be when broken things chose to mend together. The journey would be long and the end uncertain. But for the first time, Daniel did not fear the unknown, because he was not walking into it alone, and neither was anyone else. The galaxy was waking up, and its song was just beginning. Weeks passed aboard Outpost Echo, and the silence between the stars grew heavier. Not with tension, but with waiting. Daniel and Lyra settled into a quiet rhythm, neither calling it friendship nor anything more, but something steady, something real. They shared meals, walked the narrow corridors, and watched the slow pulse of the red dwarf through the observation deck glass. Lyra began to speak more, not just of the past, but of what might come. She spoke of rebuilding not cities, but trust, of listening before striking, of seeing fear not as weakness, but as a signal that someone needed help. Daniel listened, and for the first time since the war ended, he felt useful not as a soldier, but as a person. Then the message came not through official channels, but on a private frequency. One only high-ranking officers should have access to it, was short and urgent. "Meet at Helios relay station alone. Bring the Xanthari if you want answers." The sender was Captain Elena Morgan, a name Daniel had not heard in years. She had been his commanding officer during the siege of Helios Prime, the battle where he got his scar. She had vanished after the war, declared missing. Presumed dead. Daniel showed the message to Lyra, his hands unsteady. "You trust this, Elena?" she asked. "I used to," he said. "That is not an answer." He looked at her and sighed. "No, I don't know if I can. But if she has answers about what really happened at Helios, about why the Xanthari attacked that colony first before any other, then I have." Lyra nodded. "I go with you." It was not a question. They took the same scout ship, the one that had carried them to the freighter, its engines humming softly as they jumped to the Helios relay. A derelict communications hub floating in the graveyard. Of old warships, the place was dark, cold, and littered with debris from battles long past. As they docked, a single light flickered on in the central control room. Inside, Captain Elena Morgan waited. She was thinner than Daniel remembered, her dark hair streaked with gray, her uniform worn but clean. She held no weapon, but her eyes were sharp like blades. Daniel said, her voice rough with time. "You're alive?" "Barely," she replied. Then her gaze shifted to Lyra. "So this is her, the last Xanthari, the last free one," Lyra said, stepping forward. Elena smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "I brought you here because the Alliance is lying to you both. The war did not end because we won. It ended because something made the Xanthari stop something. The Alliance found and decided to keep." Daniel frowned. "What are you talking about at Helios Prime?" Elena said, "We didn't just fight Xanthari ships. We found a chamber beneath the surface, a vault older than any known civilization. Inside it was a machine not built by hands but grown like a tree of metal and light. It spoke to us not in words but in feelings. It showed us visions of unity, peace, a galaxy without borders, but it also showed us what it would cost. Obedience, total surrender. Of Will, Daniel remembered. The siege. The strange silence from the Zenthari fleet in the final hours. The way they had simply stopped firing and drifted away. "You think the Alliance took that machine?" He said. "I know they did," she replied. "And they've been testing it ever since. On prisoners, on volunteers, on anyone who won't be missed. They call it Project Harmony. But it's not Harmony. Its control era went very still." "The Whisperer," she whispered. Elena looked at her sharply. "You know it. My people called it the Whisperer. Yes, it does not create peace, it erases choice." "Exactly," Elena said. "And now they're preparing to activate it on a larger scale. A broadcast that will reach every human world. Every colony. Every mind. They say it will end all conflict forever. But at what cost?" Daniel felt sick. The Alliance had spent 12 years fighting for freedom only to build a cage of their own design. "What do we do?" he asked. "We stop them," Elena said. "But we can do it alonely." Ra stepped forward, her silver eyes gleaming. "I know where they keep. Because the Whisperer sings to me even now faintly like a heartbeat in the dark. It is on Titan Station near Saturn. The Alliance's most secure research outpost." Daniel knew Titan Station. It was where they sent the worst war criminals, where experiments happened behind triple-sealed doors. "Getting in won't be easy," Elena said. "We don't need to get in." Lyra said, "We need to wake it up." "Wake it up?" Daniel asked. "The Whisperer responds to strong emotion, to truth, to song. If I can reach its frequency, I can disrupt its control, make it turn on its master sites. Dangerous?" Elena warned. "So is silence," Lyra replied. They left Helios Relay under cover of a solar storm, the scout ship cloaked in electromagnetic noise. Titan Station loomed ahead, a massive ring of steel and glass orbiting Saturn, its surface bristling with defenses. But Elena had old codes, old routes through the blind spots. They docked in a maintenance bay, abandoned since the war inside. The station was colder than space. The air smelled of antiseptic and fear. They moved quickly through empty halls, past labs with shattered glass and flickering lights. Signs of recent struggle. Then they heard it, a low hum that vibrated in the bones. The Whisperer. Rit was housed in the central chamber, a sphere of black crystal suspended in a web of energy cables. Dozens of humans stood around it, motionless, their eyes glowing faintly silver, their minds already linked. At the control console stood Admiral Carter, the highest-ranking officer in the Alliance Science Division. "You're too late," he said without turning. He knew they were there. Of course he did, the Whisperer had told him. "You're enslaving your own people," Daniel shouted. No, Carter replied. "We are saving them from themselves. War, greed, hatred. These are human flaws. The Whisperer removes them, leaves only peace." "At what cost?" Lyra asked, stepping forward. "The cost of being human," Carter said. Turning now, his eyes also silvered. "You will see soon enough." He pressed a button and the hum grew louder. The air thickened. Daniel felt a pressure in his skull. Voices whispering promises of rest, of safety, of no more pain. But then Lyra began to sing her. Voice rose clear and strong, cutting through the static of the machine. It was the same song she had used on the freighter, but deeper, richer, filled with grief and hope and memory. She sang of her dead brother, of Daniel's lost sister, of Elena's years in hiding. She sang of fire and water, of stars and soil, of all the messy, beautiful, terrible things that made life worth living. The Whisperer shuddered. The humans around it blinked, their eyes clearing one by one. The silver light fading. No, Carter screamed, trying to boost the signal. But the machine was fighting back. It had tasted true emotion, and it wanted more. The crystal sphere cracked. Energy arced through the room. Alarms blared. Carter fell to his knees, clutching his head as the Whisperer turned on him, flooding his mind with every pain he had ever caused. Daniel grabbed Lyra, pulling her back as the chamber began to collapse. "Run," Elena shouted. They ran through the burning halls of Titan Station, alarms screaming behind them. They reached the scout ship just as the station's core went critical, as they jumped to hyperspace. Titan Station exploded behind them, a silent bloom of fire against the rings of Saturn. And the quiet that followed, no one spoke for a long time. Finally, Daniel looked at Lyra. "You knew it would do that. I hoped it would." She said the Whisperer was never evil. It was lonely, it wanted connection. But it did not understand that true connection requires freedom. Elena sat in the pilot's seat, her hands steady again for the first time in years. "What now?" she asked. "Now," Daniel said, "we tell the truth, all of it." Lyra added, "They returned to Outpost Echo not as fugitives, but as witnesses. They broadcast everything, the truth about Titan Station, the Whisperer, the Alliance's secret plan." The message spread faster than anyone expected. Colonies began to question orders. Fleets refused to stand down. The Alliance Council was forced to respond. Weeks later, a new council formed, one that included not just humans, but representatives from every species that had survived the war. Even if only one remained, Lyra stood before them, not as a prisoner, not as a weapon, but as a voice. Daniel watched from the back of the chamber, proud. Not because she had saved them, but because she had reminded them what they were fighting for. After the meeting, he found her on the observation deck once more. "You did it," he said. "We did it," she replied. The stars outside were the same as always, cold, distant, endless. But now they felt less lonely. He stood beside her, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was. Meant to be, not a soldier, not a babysitter, but a man standing next to someone who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be, and in that quiet moment between heartbeats. The future began not with a bang, but with a breath, a choice, a single step, forward into the unknown together. Months had passed since the fall of Titan Station, and the truth had spread like wildfire across the Alliance worlds. Protests turned into reforms. Old warlords were replaced by voices that had once been silenced, and for the first time in generations, the galaxy felt like it was breathing again. Daniel and Lyra remained at Outpost Echo, not because they had to, but because it had become something like home. The red dwarf still glowed faintly outside the viewports, and the corridors no longer felt cold but lived, and yet peace was fragile. Rumors began to surface from the outer colonies. Whispers of missing ships, of entire settlements going dark. Not from war, but from something quieter. Something that left no wreckage. Only silence. Daniel tried to ignore it at first, telling himself it was just fear left over from the war. But Lyra sensed it too. A wrongness in the quiet, a hum beneath the stars that should not be there. One evening as they walked the outer maintenance ring, Lyra stopped suddenly. Her silver eyes widened. "Is singing again," she said. Daniel frowned. "The Whisperer is gone. We saw it break." "Not gone," she replied, "only scattered like seeds in the wind. And now something is watering them." Before he could ask what she meant, a priority alert flashed across his wristcom, a distress call from Ceres mining colony, the same place where his sister had vanished years ago. The message was broken, but clear. "Help us. They are taking our children." Daniel felt his chest tighten. He had spent years trying not to think about Ceres, trying to believe his sister was dead, because the alternative was worse, that she had been taken, that she had suffered, and he had done nothing. "We have to go," he said. Lyra did not argue. She simply nodded and turned toward the hangar. They took a faster ship this time, a modified courier vessel with stealth shielding and reinforced hull. Elena had given it to them before vanishing again into the shadows, saying she had old debts to settle and new allies to find. The journey to Ceres took 2 days, during which Daniel barely slept. He stared at old photos of his sister Lily, a bright-eyed girl with wild curls who loved to climb trees and tell stories about space dragons. Lyra sat beside him, sometimes offering quiet words, sometimes just presence. When they arrived, Ceres was not as he remembered it. The domes were intact, the lights still on, but the streets were empty. No voices, no laughter, only a low mechanical drone coming from the central processing plant. They landed outside the main gate and moved on foot, weapons ready, but hearts heavy inside the colony. Everything was too clean, too ordered. Doors stood open. Food sat untouched on tables. Toys lay neatly arranged as if placed there by careful hands. Then they heard a child's voice singing. They followed the sound to the central plaza, where a dozen children stood in a circle holding hands. Their eyes closed, their faces. Peaceful among them was a girl who looked just like Lily, only older. Daniel stepped forward. "Lily." The girl opened her eyes. "They were silver. Welcome, brother," she said in a voice that was hers and not hers. "You are just in timely. grabbed Daniel's arm, her grip tight. The Whisperer is not in a machine anymore. She whispered it, is in them. The children began to chant, not in any language Daniel knew, but in tones that made the air vibrate. The ground trembled, and from beneath the plaza a structure began to rise. Not metal, not crystal, but something alive pulsing with soft light. It was rebuilding itself using human minds as nodes. You cannot stop it, Lily said, stepping forward. The old way was pain and fear. This is peace no more, war no more, loss, no more loneliness. At what cost? Daniel asked, his voice breaking. The cost of choice, she replied. But we do not mind. We are together now, always. Lyra moved, then not with violence but with sorrow. She walked into the circle of children and knelt before Lily. I know what it feels like, she said, to be alone, to lose everything, to want silence more than truth. But this is not silence, this is sleep, and sleep is not living. She began to sing, not the song of disruption she had used before, but something softer, something older, a lullaby from her own childhood, a song her mother had sung to her under twin suns, a song about stars that fall but seeds that rise. The children faltered. Lily blinked, tears forming in her silver eyes. I remember, she whispered. I remember, Mom. I remember climbing the old oak. I remember being scared. The structure beneath them shuddered, its light dimming. The Whisperer fought back, flooding their minds with visions of perfect order, endless calm. No more tears, no more goodbyes. But Daniel held on to Lyra's song. He thought of his sister not as she was now, but as she had been, full of fire and questions and messy hair, and he whispered her real name. Not the one the Whisperer had given her, but the one their mother had chosen, Lily Anna Brooks. The girl screamed, then not in pain, but in release. As if waking from a long dream, the silver faded from her eyes and she collapsed into Daniel's arms, sobbing. Around them, the other children fell to their knees, confused, frightened, but free. The structure crumbled into dust. In the days that followed, Daniel and Lyra helped the colony recover. They found logs hidden in the systems. The Whisperer had not come from Titan Station alone. It had been copied, sent out in data packets disguised as relief aid to war-torn worlds. It had been waiting for minds soft with grief to take root. They could not destroy every copy, but they could teach people how to fight it. Not with weapons, but with memory, with stories, with songs. Lily stayed with Daniel. She was older now, wiser in ways no child should be. But she laughed sometimes, and that was enough. Back at Outpost Echo, a new message arrived, this time from the Galactic Council. They wanted Lyra to lead a new initiative, a network of listeners. People trained to recognize the Whisperer's song and answer, hear with their own voices. She accepted, but only if Daniel came too. He agreed without hesitation. As their ship left orbit, Lyra stood beside him, watching Ceres shrink behind them. Do you think we can really stop it for good, he asked. No, she said, but we can make sure it never speaks louder than we do. And so they flew not toward war but toward hope, carrying with them the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy. The truth that being human, Zenthari or anything in between, meant being messy, loud, broken, and beautiful all at once, and that was worth protecting. The stars ahead were dark but not empty. They were full of voices waiting to be heard, and for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt like he was part of something bigger than survival, bigger than war, bigger even than peace. It was the simple act of showing up for each other again and again, no matter how hard it got, and that was enough. The core of the galaxy was not what Daniel expected. It was not a place of fire or chaos, but of stillness. A vast emptiness ringed by ancient stars that burned with a soft silver light. At its center hung a world not dead, but sleeping its surface, smooth and black like obsidian, yet pulsing faintly as if breathing. Elena's ship waited in orbit, small and scarred from her long journey. They docked without speaking, the air inside the Echo thick with anticipation. Lyra stood at the viewport, her silver eyes fixed on the planet below. She had not slept in days, not since they crossed the threshold of the core. This is where it began. She whispered. Daniel joined her. What began? Everything, she said. The first touch, the first fracture, the first choice, to control instead of connect. They landed in a crater where the ground was warm to the touch and hummed with a low, steady tone. Elena met them there. her face lined with exhaustion, but her eyes sharp as ever you came. She said, "We did." Daniel replied, "Where is it?" "Beneath us," she said. "The heart of the first mind, it has been dreaming for 10,000 years, and now it is waking." They descended through a tunnel carved not by tools, but by thought. The walls shimmered with memories, flashes of civilizations, rising and falling of voices, joining and breaking apart of love lost to fear and fear mistaken for strength. At the center of the world they found it. Not a machine, not a being, but a pool of liquid light swirling slowly in a chamber of stone. The air around it vibrated with every emotion ever felt. Joy, sorrow, rage, hope all tangled together like roots. "This is the source," Lyra said, stepping forward. "The Whisperer was only a splinter of this, and it is in pain." Elena added, "It has been alone too." Long Daniel felt it then, not in his ears, but in his bones, a deep, aching loneliness so vast it threatened to swallow him whole. He saw visions of his sister lost on Ceres, of his parents waiting for news that never came, of all the people he had failed. To save the pool rippled as if sensing his thoughts. Lyra reached for his hand. "Do not fight it," she said. "Let it see you." He closed his eyes and did not push the pain away. He held it. Let it move through him. And as he did, the light in the pool softened. The others joined them. Nora humming a planting song, Jules tapping a rhythm on her tool belt, Mara whispering stories of children who refused to be silent one by one. They offered their truths not as weapons but as gifts. The pool began to change. The light grew warmer, brighter, and from its center a form rose, not solid but shifting, taking shape from their memories, a face made of starlight and soil of laughter and tears. "You have come not to destroy me." The form said, its voice, the sum of all voices, "But to remember me. We remember you." Lyra said, "You are not a god, not a weapon, you are a mirror." "Yes," the form replied, "and mirrors only show what is offered." The Whisperer was born when fear was offered. It showed fear back, magnified until it became a cage, but now you offer something else. Daniel stepped forward. "We offer choice." The form smiled and the chamber filled with light, not blinding but gentle like dawn after a long night. In that moment across the galaxy, something shifted. Colonies that had been holding their breath felt the weight lift. Ships that had flown in silence began to sing again. Children who had been taught to obey began to ask why. The Whisperer did not vanish. It could not. It was part of the whole, but it changed. It became a voice among many, not the only one. When they returned to the surface, the sky was different. The stars seemed closer, brighter, as if they had been waiting for this moment. Elena looked at Daniel, her eyes wet with tears. "I thought I was coming here to end something," she said, "but I was coming to begin it." They stayed on the world for 3 days, not speaking much, just being together, watching the light shift across the sky, sharing food and silence and memories. On the 4th day they boarded their ship. Selena would stay behind for a time to listen to the heart of the first mind, to learn its rhythms and share them with those who asked. Daniel and Lyra would return to the outer worlds not as leaders, but as reminders that no one had to face the dark alone. As the echo lifted off the surface, Lyra placed her hand on the viewport. "Do you think it will last?" he asked. "Not if we stop singing," she replied. "So we keep singing, yes?" They flew back through the core, the stars parting like curtains drawn aside, revealing a galaxy no longer broken but healing. Their first stop was Mars, where the capital city had begun to rebuild. Not with steel and code, but with gardens and music halls and places where people could gather just to talk. Lily was there, waiting. She ran to Daniel as soon as he stepped off the ship. Her arms around him tight. "I heard the song. She said it was in my dreams." She held her close, and for the first time, he did not feel the old ache of loss, only the warmth of presence. They visited Ceres next, then Viridia, then Frosthold and Aqualis. Each place changed, not perfectly but honestly. People were learning to listen, not just to each other but to themselves, to the quiet voice that said, "This is not right. This is not love. This is not peace." Nora stayed on Viridia to help the forest recover. Jules went to Frosthold to build listening towers that turned wind into music. Mara returned to Aqualis to teach the next generation how to tell stories that set people free, one by one. The crew scattered not because they were done, but because the work was everywhere. Daniel and Lyra remained aboard the Echo, its name now known across 100 worlds, not as a warship, but as a vessel of return. They received messages daily from colonies, asking for songs from parents, asking how to talk to their children from elders, asking how to remember their own youth. They answered everyone one evening as they drifted near the rings of Saturn, the same place where Titan Station had fallen. Lyra turned to Daniel. "What will you do when this is over?" she asked. He looked at her, looked at her, at the violet shimmer of her skin, the silver depth of her eyes, the quiet strength in her voice. "This isn't over," he said. "And I don't want it to be." She smiled, then not the sad smile of someone carrying the weight of a dead world, but the soft smile of someone building a new one. "Good," she said, "because I was hoping you would say that." They sat in silence after that, watching the ice particles catch, the light like scattered stars. Somewhere far away, a child sang a lullaby, her mother's voice joining in a moment later. Somewhere else, a farmer planted seeds while humming an old tune. Somewhere in the dark between worlds, a ship carried stories instead of weapons, and in the quiet heart of it all, two people who had once been enemies now sat together, not because the war was over, but because something better had begun. The galaxy was not fixed. It never would be, but it was alive. And that was enough. They turned the ship toward the next signal, not of distress, but of invitation. "Come listen with us," and they went.